You're listening to the Video and Company Podcast, a podcast where we talk about running a video production business. Today, we have Trey Riley and Ken Jackson from Cine Vibes on the show. They run a film podcast of another sort, and I wanted to just see what someone else doing a similar thing in the same industry has experienced. So here is the guys from Cine Vibes.
Hey, what's up? My name is Kenneth Jackson, and I'm an actor from Atlanta, Georgia.
I'm Trey Riley. I'm a writer, director, and producer from Charlotte, North Carolina.
And so you guys together are the Cine Vibes podcast. Tell me how that started. And this is the first time I've had two guests. So I'm just going to kind of let y'all, whoever fights and gets to the answer first, can answer it, and however we're going to work with that. But yeah, just tell me how it got started and why you started it and how everything's been going with that.
Well, I will beat Trey to this one. I believe the conception for Cine Vibes started, Cine Vibes namely with me, because I just was wanting to do something. I mentioned, if you listen to the other, to our podcast on our episode with Ethan, I'm not the type to just sit around and twiddle my thumbs and just hope that Steven Spielberg calls me up for a movie, So, and much of like what you had mentioned on our podcast was you wanted to start a podcast and doing this because you wanted to meet other people in the industry and talk with them. And that was a big thing for me, was I wanted to learn more about the industry and have an excuse to learn more about the industry. It's like we had talked about, was I need to have that constant pressure of I need to put something out. And what better way than putting out a weekly podcast where people expect a podcast from you, and you need to provide content and you need to continually learn. And so that's how the conception started. And I knew that I wanted someone who was extremely driven and dedicated and someone I trusted as a co-host. And so I reached out to Trey, and the rest is history.
Yeah, I remember it was almost like a Instagram poll or something. I feel like you're like, hey, want to start a podcast? Anyone down? And I immediately responded. I was like, yeah, I'm down. So within a week, it seemed like we were getting together and thinking about how we wanted to structure the podcast, what we wanted to do. And even since then, it's all been a work in progress. If anyone's been following along, you'll see it's really come a long way from that first episode. But yeah, we met on a film project. So I think it's always a testament to getting out and working and getting out of your comfort zone and being a part of projects, because you meet these people that you're probably going to interact with again. Now, I don't think I would have ever thought that me and Ken would do a podcast, from him being an actor in a movie that I was barely even a part of in terms of helping out ADing a few nights. But here we are, and it's kind of been one of those cool things where we've gotten to open some doors that maybe wouldn't have opened if we didn't have an avenue or a platform like a podcast.
Yeah.
Definitely. So what would you say is the general consensus of what the show's about? Because you interview filmmakers of different levels. Sometimes they're actors, sometimes they're on production, sometimes they're crew members and stuff like that. What would you say is the high level kind of theme of the show?
Yeah, I think we want to interact with people at varying levels of the industry. Obviously, we find ourselves towards the lower end of it. We know we're not getting Ryan Gosling on or anything like that, but
not yet. I've sent an email.
Yeah, hasn't gotten
Believe
back
me.
with us. And we want to talk to the people working in it and find out what they know, how they've come to where they are, and really just try and grab that information and hand it down to the people coming up behind us, because the only way, at least for me, I think this goes for a lot of people, is you learn from seeing other people doing it. Someone told you something, someone helped you out, someone gave you a shot. So I think part of it's paying that back. And then the other part of it is we just love movies. So we also have movie reviews that we do of a lot of the movies we enjoy. And so those are fun to do. And then, talk about the Oscars or things like that. Just different hot topics in the industry that we run across. So it's kind of a mixed bag, but primarily the interviews and the reviews are our bread and butter.
Yeah, the biggest thing that we wanted with this podcast, I primarily needed somebody to just nerd out about stuff with, and I knew Trey was that type to nerd out about things. And so when we talk to guests, we usually do get into the nitty-gritty about stuff on the more technical side. And I think our podcast, we try to be geared towards a lot of cinephiles. So me and Trey, when we review films, we love just sitting in there and dissecting a film, not necessarily out of we want to see, how this was exactly done and what exactly you can copy from it, but rather it sort of like see it as both an art form and yet a technical piece at the same time. And so we really do focus on a lot of different aspects rather than just the latest gossip on Ryan Gosling, which we may end up doing just on tangents.
Yeah, it's weird. So my YouTube recommendations have been getting really annoying. And I don't know if you've heard of this show, the Dick Cavett Show. It's an old interview show from, I guess, it's a British guy. I don't know if it was American television or not. I know my parents watched it, but there was an interview with Brian De Palma and Martin Scorsese, and the comments were all pretty much the same thing, saying, wow, imagine a modern talk show on television talking about the concepts and the theory and the technique of directing and producing a film, because now apparently it's just the talk shows and the director hosts just kind of basically talk about how cool the actor is and how it was like to work with the actor. And I was like, I've never thought about it like that, but that's exactly what all of it is.
Yeah, I think that's something that it's a very niche type of person, and if you listen to very few other podcasts, it goes into that depth of you may end up talking about exposure, when talking about film and just the technical aspects to achieve a certain shot or a certain lighting setup. And I find myself being one of those nerdy types that really loves to look and dissect that sort of stuff because it's interesting. And Trey is right there with me. He's always bringing out different aspects I didn't even think about of a shot.
Yeah, as much as we'd like to talk to Keira Knightley and the likes of those types of folks, I want to talk to gaffers. I want to talk to people gripping and really find out what their life is like, what the day-to-day is, how they do their job, because a lot of that for myself is still very foreign. I defer to them because they know what they're doing and I don't in their world. So I think we just really want to find knowledge, and that's why I really love the Team Deacons podcast. I'm sure you've listened to that or at least heard of it. Just a huge resource, and he's just going through his contacts list and everyone that's ever made anything amazing. He's like, oh yeah, let's have them on and talk to them, and it's just thank you, as a godsend to get that.
Well, speaking of Deacon's contact list, how do you guys pick your guests? Is it someone that you want to work with, or is it someone that you just respect their work, or is it someone that how do you do it?
It's a little bit of both. Starting out, initially was a lot of my contacts that I had made from the short films I had done around here in Charlotte. And then beyond that, we started getting a little bit adventurous and like, what if we just send an Instagram DM and see what happens? And surprisingly enough, people actually respond and they think it's cool to be on a podcast. So again, I think it's having that platform. Like if I just ask someone, do you want to like talk to me? I don't know, that sounded weird, but you know, they're going to maybe ignore it. But if I'm like, hey, we have a podcast, check out these episodes, we want to talk to you about, and then like actually be specific, you know, this short film you did, this music video, they tend to want to be on the show.
Yeah, the guests that we have, one of the things we wanted to do early on in the podcast was find our niche, which our niche was both the Charlotte and Atlanta industries, and pretty much highlight the indie scene with a lot of people that we knew. And so when we do look for guests and such, it's usually in the Charlotte or Atlanta industries that we have some connections to, because people we happen to have connections with are very much more likely to be receptive of emails / DMs saying, hey, I want to talk to you. So we usually pick people that we do want to work with most of the time. If not, we have worked with them in the past and would love to continue to work with them. And these are just people that we think are knowledgeable on subjects. We think they have something to bring to the table, and just people that, like Trey said, are really good in what they do, whether they're a grip or a sound technician, whatever it is. We always are looking for someone both, you know, outside of our reach, but yet still familiar in a sense.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. So you would say that you've put people on, and I guess I'll say out of experience, like typically, and we talked about this right before the episode started, is that I was too timid to ask someone for a cup of coffee or a beer. And I created the podcast as a bit of a ruse to just basically have a chat with someone. And I mean, you know, it's hardly a ruse when I'm renting a podcast studio and all that stuff. But, you know, it's just because I was an introverted person. And so I would always reach out to people that like I want to work with. But I can see from your guys' perspective is like, you know, being on set and, you know, being in the roles that you guys are in, where, you know, like in my role, I would typically be hiring people or be wanting to be a crew member. And you guys are like crew members, so you want to like keep being on the rosters and keep being in people's mouths. So like if you did work with someone, the likelihood of you working with them again is about average. But if you bring them onto a show, you know, you're able to show your personality a little more, and then also be like, well, hey, like your name is in their mouth continually, and that would be, you know, good for you to work with them again, I would assume. Yeah, that's some of the biggest stuff about this industry is the connections and showing people that you want to work with them repeatedly. And that's how I see a lot of my connections, and even connections off of the podcast. It's, you know, not necessarily what can we do in the future, but rather like, yo, we vibe with this person. We want to like keep this relationship going and continue to foster that, because it's following each other's traveling through this industry. They're step up the ladder just as we are too.
Yeah, the podcast is essentially that cup of coffee that you mentioned. We get a chance to explore someone's life a little bit more, and they get familiar with us, and then you just kind of open up, you know, like meeting a friend that you end up, you know, going through life with. That's been a lot of the interactions we've had, and it's kind of been ironic how much or how similar a lot of the people are in terms of how they kind of carry themselves just in this type of work we do. there's kind of a sense of laid backness that has been nice in terms of people being more open to doing things that are maybe uncomfortable. I mean, if you came to me and asked me to be on a podcast, even though we have a podcast, I'd be kind of hesitant, even though right now I'm on your podcast. But I don't know, it's kind of an interesting paradigm there, and I think people kind of just open up when you try and be personal, and that's kind of a driving point for what we do.
Mm-hmm. Well, so have you noticed at all, and I haven't run into it too often, but I have run into it, is that some people in our field, especially like ones that are really good at what they do, and they might be in that mid-tier, closing in on being like higher tier, but the fact that they're in that environment can really ground them and keep them like humbled, which is usually a great thing, but sometimes they can be so humble that they might see themselves as being like, oh no, like don't put me on a podcast, I'm not worth it at all, even though it's like, dude, you're like 5 steps ahead of me, like I need to talk to you. Have you ever run into that where it's like really introverted or like really humble, and is that something that's pretty common, or is that a rare?
I don't think that.
Yeah, I'd say it's probably most people we talk to, because even if they're what we deem like at the same level as we are, it's still like pretty wild how much they know, and it's almost a sense of questioning what they know at the same time. We could talk to, like we had talked to a good friend of ours, Gavin, and we were talking about sound and everything, and he knows a lot about sound and sound production, sound recording, and he would still say, I'm still at the bottom of the totem pole. I don't really feel too confident, right? Yeah, he kind of has that like, oh, who am I to tell people how to do a certain thing? And we're over here like, you're talking about stuff we couldn't even start to think about.
Yeah. Well, and you had also mentioned earlier that you're up in Atlanta and you're here in Rock Hill, Charlotte, Greater Charlotte area. Since you two have had a lot of these conversations together, it would be easier to ask. So my podcast was originally supposed to be Southeast based also. It started out just North Carolina and South Carolina, and then it went from like DC to Atlanta, and then we kind of mixed Florida into the mix. So I would assume most of the listeners are from the Southeast, or at least have some kind of roots here.
We've seen a few folks from Vietnam, so let's just throw that out there.
There are some people in Vietnam.
I don't know how they found it, but we appreciate you.
I mean, it's awesome how that stuff happens. But so how would you guys say not necessarily the difference, because we know Atlanta has like a big scene, but like what would you say you've noticed that's in common or like connected between Atlanta and Charlotte? Like, do you notice that some Atlanta people come up to work in Charlotte and vice versa, or like do you notice that there's some kind of connection between the two cities? Because it seems like there's something there.
Yeah, I do believe there is a connection, and the connection that I've seen mostly, because I usually float around in the actor sphere, is casting. Is one that's not necessarily needed to be stationed here. There are a lot of different casting offices that are based out of Charlotte. There are some, talent agencies that are based in Charlotte. Some talent agencies are based even like Miami, Tampa, some of these places. So it's not, it's becoming less of a, it's either Atlanta or nowhere. And I think Charlotte is one of the other major players in the film industry in the Southeast. So if it's not Atlanta you're talking about, it's Charlotte. And then I think if it's not Charlotte, it's Miami. If it's not Miami, New Orleans, So it's less structured as it used to be, from what I've gathered, and so you don't necessarily have to be in Atlanta per se, but I've seen some transmission between both cities.
Yeah, I've thought that, and this is just with myself personally, I never had to move away from Charlotte to be successful at what I want to do with directing, because I'm right in the backyard of Atlanta. If for some reason I get to make a movie like La La Land and need to go out to LA, like I could do that for a period and then come back. It seems like the whole film industry is very mobile now. Like your house can be in Wyoming and you can do anything you want to do. And so I think whether it's actors or crew members, even in your case, you mentioned moving up to the mountains, like you're still going to be equally successful at doing work around Charlotte, up as far as, you mentioned DC and, down into Florida. It's just, I think everyone's really mobile and willing to travel, and I kind of laugh because they're always like willing to work as a local. Like, who the freak's not going to say they're willing to work as a local?
Yeah.
Like, of course you are. Like, I've never understood that, but it's really cool because of that. We get to see a lot of people come across our path that maybe we wouldn't have, say, even 5-10 years ago.
Is there a job or a project that you worked on that you think you probably would not have been on that project if it wasn't for the podcast, whether that was like a guest you brought on or someone that saw it and then was like, let me look at this guy's stuff and found their stuff? Is there a project that you worked on that, and even if you think you might have gotten it without the podcast, but the podcast probably helped? Is there a situation or example like that, and what would that be? And Trey, we'll start with you.
I think if 2020 had gone differently, I would have a different answer. But we started this in 2020, so we haven't really gotten a chance to work with any of those folks. Say we had someone on to follow up with them and be a part of their project, or have them on one of our projects. So I can't really say if the podcast has connected those dots, but I think it set it up, even continuing into this year and 2022 for some of those opportunities to pan out, where someone we've talked to or had on the show would now be more willing to be a part of our project, just simply because they now know us a little bit better.
Yeah. And honestly, when you asked, it was almost the same thing as what Trey was saying in my boat. But one of me and Trey's good friends, he just happened to listen to the podcast quite a bit. And Bryce Heller, he would listen to the podcast, and that would be a topic of conversation whenever we would meet up. Although we hadn't interviewed him yet, he would ask me about podcasting, how's it going, how is this guest, all that sort of stuff. And I ended up working with him recently on a theater production for a theater around here, like a 48-hour theater sprint thing around here. And that's one of the cases where I think the podcast probably kept me in his purview as a potential to work on projects and stuff, because he can hear me every week talk about my interest in film and just love of acting. So I think that is a case where, yeah, if I didn't have the podcast, it probably would not have panned out the way it has.
Awesome. And so I've been doing this show. I keep forgetting whose show we're on. We're on mine. So I've been doing this show. I think I started October. I'd have to look this up. It's either October 2019 or it was. It could have been. I don't think it's 2018. There's no way. It had to be like somewhere in the middle of 2019. Because if I have done this in 3 years and I'm only on episode 15, there's a problem.
Hey, you're a
Because I
busy
think
man.
you guys are already like at like episode 35 or something.
I think
We'll be
20
at 42 by the end of season 2 in the summertime.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, running circles around me. I've been doing it for about 2 years and was kind of surprised that anyone listened, to be honest. And I've kind of noticed that like the guest is where I would pull the audience, because the guest is gonna go home and they're gonna be like, dude, I was just on this podcast, like you should check it out. And then their wife's gonna check it out, their friend's gonna check it out, the boss is gonna check it out. This is like, oh, that's cool, my employee, my husband, my friend was on a show. And that's pretty much the only kind of marketing I've done, is like whoever's on it, they typically show it off to people.
Yeah.
And then you get the random people where it's like, that's not connected to any of those, and they're like, hey, I found your podcast on Apple just randomly, I actually live in town, like you're doing a great job, or can I meet you for coffee or something like that. And it's kind of really surprising when that happens. Have you guys had any kind of like instances with that, or like what's your general interaction with like the listeners like?
There's been a few people, actors primarily, that have sent us messages, and we were maybe already mutual friends with them, but never talked to them in any sort of length of time or anything like that. And I can think of one specifically. We're gonna have him on at some point, but I won't drop his name yet. But he was like, dude, like, when are you gonna have me on the show? And I was like, someone like actually wants to be, because we've reached out to date for people that have been on, but someone reaching out to us, maybe you felt the same way. It's just like kind of that who am I thing again going on. Like, it's kind of a humbling experience, and that's been one instance that stood out to me. And just anyone that listens saying like cool, like simply just saying cool, or like awesome episode, or those kind of things keep you going, because it's kind of lonely doing a podcast a lot of times. I mean, it's me and Ken, but we don't know. I guess we do, because we have analytics, but to keep going on and on and on each week, and to know that there's people that are staying with it, that kind of helps make it a little bit worth it, and that you're maybe adding some value to their life.
Yeah, I think that definitely it's not necessarily abundant as of yet, since we're still in our podcast infancy, but I think that of the few instances where it has happened, somebody messages us and just talks about the podcast and says, I love what you're doing. Like, some people, they'll share our posts and say, there was one instance where they were like, I really needed to hear this podcast today. And I was like, wow, that's such a strange feeling that someone listened to the podcast and actually had a positive, like, this is what I needed today, and I think that's something that we hopefully can foster in the future, and just continually provide value to the listeners in a form or fashion that they enjoy.
Yeah, it's really weird to like affect someone you don't know, essentially.
Yeah.
So like, what's the game plan? Do you kind of have some plans to maybe make some changes, or do you have people in mind that are really cool that you're excited about, even though you can't mention it, because I'm sure that's a thing?
We've got...
Yeah, I think...
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Trey. No, I want you to. No, Trey.
We've got, at least each season, it's a goal of ours to have someone on that's a higher level than we are. We had that happen with Justin Robinson in season 1. He'll say he's not a higher level than anyone because he's really humble, and that's fine. But literally, technically, all those areas he is. And so that was a goal that we met in season 1. We have the same goal in this season. And we want to just keep upping that. I mean, ideally, we start season 6 and have like, I don't know, Ashton Kutcher on there or something. Like, you know.
I feel like you could do that. I think you could do that.
Yeah, like some of these goals sound weird coming out of your mouth, but I don't think they're as far-fetched as, again, maybe they would have been 10 years ago.
Yeah, I think that right now that is mainly the goal, is to constantly, like we talked about in the beginning of the podcast, find our comfort zone and go beyond it and constantly find something. Like on our podcast, you know, we're not sitting still on the same stuff that we did earlier in the podcast. Like episode 1, now, if you listen to some of the later episodes that we've had in season 2, we're starting to rebrand. We're starting to find our own voice as a podcast, and I think having the weekly episodes is giving us enough edge of we're releasing episodes at a consistent time frame. And you know, when you look at that, if you were to release, and we're doing seasons, so there are some weeks, maybe a month or 2 that gets cut out, so that's about 8 weeks or so cut out of the 52. But if you still take the however much that is, like the 44 weeks that are left, you still have 44 episodes put up in a year. And I think growing that catalog for us, and just our experience behind the mics and talking to people that we don't know if, you know, we're punching up a little bit and we're a little bit out of our comfort zone, it keeps us on our toes. And I think after a while, you know, it'll just allow us to have Ashton Kutcher on the podcast. Put it out in the universe. Yeah. Ashton, please email us.
Well, good. By the way, do you already have the big finale for season 2 planned out? You don't have to say who it is, or is it just you're still looking?
It's slightly up in the air, but it's someone that has a notable part in Ozark.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that show.
Yeah,
that's
it's not Jason Bateman, by the way.
Yeah.
But if it was, I would have been like, we have freaking Jason Bateman.
Instantly.
And then he would back out, and then it would be ruined.
Well, that's awesome. Well, I mean, yeah, Ozark was filmed in Georgia. I forget the name of the mountains. I'm sure Kevin knows. But it's...
a lot of it's around Atlanta, right? Just right outside, whatever that area is called.
There's a park. It's got like a Native American name, like Ashwagandha or something like that.
Oh, okay.
Forest. Anyway, one of my favorite films growing up was Juno, and Jason Bateman played such a douchebag in that movie. I hated him in all other movies, but like his career is bonkers. Like I think Vanity Fair did a review on his career, and it went back to the 80s. Like he's been on TV since the 80s. I did not even know that.
Yeah, he's been around for a minute.
Yeah. Well, I guess we'll wrap up on this one. 8 o'clock on the dot. Sweet.
Look at you. Perfect.
So, yeah, just let everybody know how everybody can check out this show.
All right. Trey, please take it away.
You can find our show on any of the streaming platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Newly, Stitcher this season. Just search Cine Vibes. We'll come up right there. And then also, if you want to, on Instagram, you can follow us at the Cine Vibes. And each week when we post new episodes, we update that, and you can find that link in the bio and jump right to it. So that's our primary ways that you can find us.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you for having us.
Be on.
So thanks for listening. Be sure to check the notes for websites and Instagram handles to check out the guest. Be sure to follow me on Instagram at I Am The Animist and YouTube at The Animist Official. Thanks.